Hello. Today is November 12th, 2023, and we talk about our The Perplexed Club. The recording is about not what separates humanity and causes all the conflicts in the world today and ever, but about what unites us to find the silver lining, the good things that will coming out from current conflicts in the Middle East, in Europe, and everywhere else in the world. So if we look at it from a standpoint of positive outlook on humanity and allow the opponent to express himself or herself freely, we might find in retrospect that we have a lot more that unites us than divides us. And oftentimes, to forcefully put our point of view on somebody else, presuming that I'm right and another guy or the gal are not right, it's probably too hasty. Instead of debating and arguing who is right and wrong, the attempt should be to find the common ground. And upon the analysis, we'll find out that the commonality of our ground is a lot more, probably 90% versus what unites us. So today we'll look at it from a standpoint of Middle East. I want to do a very simplistic overview of the conflict in the Middle East and come to a conclusion that there's no reason for the conflict to be, that we have every reason from both sides to come to a peaceful solution of our problem if we only think about the background and look at the history, not 5, 10, 15 years ago, but all the way up to the creation of the world. Well, I'm Jewish, and I go by the Torah. The Muslims go by the Holy Quran. And I have no problem with the Holy Quran, as I find that Quran and Torah essentially create a lot of unity. And what people think separates these two documents, two books, Quran and Torah, it's only separation by artificial examinations of the sources. In reality, it's one document. As a prophet of the Quran, Muhammad relates to his Jewish brethren in very positive terms. And occasional verses in the Quran, they could be interpreted as perhaps disrespectful to other people. It's only misunderstanding of entire text. The Quran is peaceful, and it says, in the name of Allah, the merciful, and the Torah is peaceful, and so is a New Testament for Christians. And the same thing comes from Buddhism and other religions. It is interpretation of the verses in the Torah, in the Quran, in the New Testament, they can be taken out of context and make it violent and lead to the problem between people. Let's take a look at actually the background of the Middle East and find out that how surprisingly united and brotherly we are, and actually brothers. Well, let's take a look at this. Behind me, there's a map of the Middle East. So if I go, let me do a share and go to the more detailed maps. Okay, let's see, where am I? Okay, so that's a map. So when you think about it, approximately 4,500 years ago, we go back to flood. Everybody knows about Noah and the flood. That happened somewhere in the area that you're looking at, the Middle East. Gan Eden, where Adam and Eve lives, was behind to the people of the flood of Noah by approximately 10 generations from Adam to Noah. Noah, the righteous person, lived and walked with God. Well, whether you're religious or not religious, it's still interesting to compare the historical notes from whatever perspective you want to do, from the religious perspective or historical, geographical perspective. In either case, you'll find unity in what I will try to present to you today, unity and goodness. So let's see what was happening. So the Noah, after the flood, was the only one. He, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives survived the flood. And of course, the animals, he took them to the Noah's Ark, We all know the story. Muslims know it, Jews know it, Christians know, and the rest of the humanity probably knows it also at least from a school books. So if you take a look at Noah's at the Noah's children, he had three kids: Japheth, Ham, and Shem. Okay, three sons. Quran talks about it, Torah talks about it, and obviously Christian Bible talks about it too, Old and New Testament. So let's take a look at Shem. I come from Shem. I'm Jewish. From Shem had 5 kids: Elam, Asur, Arpachshad, difficult to pronounce the names in English here, Lut, and Aram. From one of the kids, from Arpachshad, comes in Shelach, Eber, Peleg, Joktan, and on and on and on and on, until eventually come to Abraham, from which Jews and Muslims trace their lineage. But there were other kids. There was Elam, Ashur, Lut, and Aram, and from them comes also different nations. And even from Shelah came in not only Abrahamic dynasty, but pre-Abraham dynasty. So let's take a look at this. These people, 3 tribes, spread initially in these areas. The Arab tribes, from which we Jews come from. Abraham is one of the Arab tribes. We lived in the area today, essentially Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Yemen, Oman, Kuwait, around between Persian Gulf and the Red Sea. There's an Arab peninsula, and that's the area where my ancestors come from, Arabs' ancestors come from, Jewish ancestors come from. That happened 4,500 years ago. Approximately 1,000 years later, 3,500 years ago, one tribe led by Abraham Avinu, we'll call him, he left the area, this area, at which time, it was the area he lived was populated by the idol worshippers. Of course, all these nations initially worshipped stars and idols and signs and nature and whatever they worship. There was no unified God at that time as a concept. So it was mixed between children of Ham lived what today is Africa, Egypt, and if you go a little bit more west towards Libya and so forth, the sons of Ham, Hamites. The sons of Shem lived, as I mentioned, in the Arabian Peninsula, and son of Japheth went to Europe, Iran, China. Iran was Persia at that time, and so forth. So if you look at the list again, so Shemites, Semites are Jews and Arabs, and that's the tree of Shem. Hamites, Ham had 4 kids: Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. And Japheth had 7 children, from which Europeans come, Persians come, Chinese come, and so forth. So Ham, from Cush comes the Central Africa, essentially Ethiopia. Put is Libya, Mitzrayim is Egypt, and Canaan, there was 11 kids that lived in the area where today is present Israel. The 7 of these kids, Zidon, Het, Jebusites, Amorites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Canaan itself, the father of them, they were, according to the Torah, displaced by the Jewish, at that time, that's probably approximately 3,500 years ago, roughly speaking, that were coming from Egypt to the Canaan, the promised land that God promised to the Jews, according to the Torah and according to the Quran. Okay. From if you look at the route they took, well, here's Abraham. He's living from Babylon, which was not Semitic. It was children of Ham also spread into here. And he went around the desert. It wasn't very easy to travel, to Haran and on to Canaan, and ended up in Canaan. Of course, the Torah tells us how Abraham traveled to Egypt, returned from Egypt, he and his wife Sarah. And the story, all that story is very well documented in the Torah and in the Quran. So that's the Abraham, who is the great-great-great-great-grandfather of the Jews and the Arabs today. So we have a common relatives. We're brothers, not even cousins. We're brothers. Let's just go a little bit further. This is, okay, Terah is Semites. He's the father of Abraham. He had three boys, Abraham, Haran, and Nahor. And for Abraham comes in Isaac and Ishmael. Ishmael was actually born first, and Arab consider him the firstborn rights. Jews consider Isaac the firstborn rights, although Isaac was born 13 years after Ishmael. But that debate is academic, and we can talk about separately. The point is, Abraham had two children, Ishmael and Isaac. In fact, in the Torah states when Abraham died, Ishmael and Isaac together went and buried Abraham, and they reconciled at his grave. And that was Torah from that deduces that ultimate Ishmael, the word Ishmael means Ishmael, God will hear. Ishaq was joy. So the God will hear joy over reconciliation of the brothers Isaac and Ishmael. Over the centuries, it changed to currently a little bit of friction between us, although at times in history it wasn't exactly that. It was good times, it was not so good times, but today there is some conflict, although reconciliations seem to be happening. There's a peace with between Israel and several Arab countries, and hopefully it will extend further. Anyway, so Isaac had Jacob and Esau, and from Jacob, with 4 wives that he had, come the 12 tribes from which Jews essentially come. From Ishmael, he also had 12 children and the girl, the daughter, and Ishmaelites also stayed in the area. Now, of course, Ishmael is a son of Abraham and Hagar. Hagar is Egyptian. At that time, Egypt wasn't Arabic yet. That was ancient Egypt. Egyptians were not Semites, they were Hamites, children of Ham. That was before the mix of the people started to happen many, many centuries later. So Ishmael essentially has Abraham as the father and the mother, Hagar. Ishmael marries also Hagar later on, arranges a wedding for the Ishmael, and the girl, the wife of Ishmael, is also Egyptian. So Ishmael's descendants are half Hamites from the mother side and half Shemites from the Abraham side. Isaac is a Shemites, Shem, from both Abraham and Sarah. Okay, but in any case, they're brothers. So if you look later, what happens later, we're not going to trace too much of the Jewish history, just to mention that during the Exodus, and that happened, of course, another 500 years later, when Jews spending several centuries in Egypt, in the area of Goshen, when they left Egypt, they traveled into Sinai Peninsula and on and on. Of course, you can read in the Torah, in the Quran, what happened, wilderness of Paran. They traveled over on the east side of the Jordan, east side, and they crossed over into Canaan. And when they came Canaan, they essentially confronted those 7 nations of Ham, and those 7 nations essentially disappeared, whether they were expelled, whether they were killed, whether they merged. Nobody knows exactly what happened, but basically Jews were commanded to take over the land from the native 7 nations of Canaan, 7 nations of Ham. So that went on into history. But in one portion of Canaan, over here, a little portion near Gaza, and Gaza is a big news today because there's a lot of problems happening in Gaza, fights, Israel and Palestinians are fighting, unfortunately, instead of making peace. But in Gaza, where Palestinians today live there, and initially they're called Plistines. What are the Plistines? Palestinians come from Plistines. Let's understand that. So we're going back to, well, that just in Israel, in Canaan, this chart, if you're interested, is 12 tribes. That's how they settled in Canaan. In the very south was Judah and Shimon, then Dan, Ephraim, Manasseh, and on, and 2.5 tribes, half from Manasseh tribes, Gad and Reuben, settled on the east side of Jordan in the area that a portion of present-day Transjordan. That is where the Jews settled when they came with Moses in the year 24, let's call it 2500. Okay. And here's from 0 to 2000, Abraham time from 2000 to 4000, exile, and then 4000 to 6000 nowadays. That just gives you a little bit of perspective. Rome went in and conquered Israel and sent Jews to exile approximately 2,000 years ago, and we all know that history. So that's just about the Jewish side of history in brief, and then we're going to go to we'll go back to the map of the nation. So from what happened to the children of Ham? Again, we talked about Canaan, the 7 of the 11 nations sent to Canaan. Mitzrayim, that is also Egypt. Mitzrayim had many kids, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kids, of which 2, Patrusim and Kaftarim and Kasluchim, settled, some near Gaza, and some actually went to Crete. Crete is Kaftor in biblical terms, and here it is in the modern map. The Crete is a little bit north of Libya and Egypt, and from Canaan, from Mitzrayim, the brother of Canaan, some went to Crete, and some stayed in the area over here, hard to see on this map, but let's say near Gaza. These 2 nations mixed around, and they formed Crete's Kaftarim from Crete came to the area where today is Gaza, and they started to call themselves Plishtim. Now, what Plishtim, Palestinians today? Where this word comes from? The Hebrew word for Plishtim originates from Liflosh. Liflosh means to invade. So essentially, Palestinians at that time, this we're talking about 3,000 years ago, 3,500 years ago, they were called invaders by the local population because they came from Crete and displaced essentially their brothers that lived there at the time. Pasrusim, Kasluhim, and Kaftarim replaced them, and they became Plishtim. Okay, now skipping a little bit further down the road, when the Romans 2,000 years ago conquered Israel and Jews went into exile, Romans, to rub it in to the Jews, they call this area, instead of Israel or Canaan before Israel, Palestina, the name of the Plishtim, knowing that it was for the Jews unpleasant to hear that their country is renamed to one other nation. So they named it, the Romans named it after the tribe of Ham. The Phoenicians that came essentially and settled in that area, in one area of Israel near Gaza. All right, so that's just a little bit of a background of what was happening in that area. Okay, so we can see now, if we step a little bit further, of course, I'm going through all the only brief summary. So many, many years ago, what happens after the flood, after dispersion of the people, in the area of the Middle East, where Saudis today, Kuwait, those Arabs never left this place. They are the most ethnical, the most native people of this land. One of the tribes of them left, Jews became essentially, we're their brothers, one of the tribes. Ishmaelites that descended from Ishmael are essentially also brothers to the Arabs in Saudi Arabia, but they're ethnically somewhat different because Saudi is just Arabs, 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 and Ishmaelites are partially Arabs through Abraham and partially Hamites through the mother Hagar. Okay, but anyway, you look at it, they are related, but they're not as close ethnically, so genetically, to the Arabs of Saudi Arabia as so. Let's call this Arabs. Let's call Ismailites and another sort of Arabs, and let's call Jews also Arabs ethnically, but religiously evolving to a little bit branch of the religion, which is called Judaism, different from what at that time Arabians believed, just like Jews before they left with Abraham. They believe in basically idol worshiping the stars and all that. Eventually, in the 7th century of Common Era, roughly 1,300 years ago, Muhammad, who was born in Saudi Arabia, Mecca, Medina, we know the story of that. He traveled to Israel, to Jerusalem, and traveling back and forth, he had revelation for angel Gabriel, and also historically for what he learned traveling with caravans, he was exposed Christianity, but then was 7 centuries old. Judaism, of course, at that time was 2,500 years old. And he, looking at the sources and having the divine revelations, essentially came what today we know as the Islam. And the Quran is a holy Quran, the writings that is sacred to the Muslims, and it should be also, and it is revered by the Jews and by all nations, because it's a holy document. It differs from the Torah, different from the New Testament, but the fundamentals are very similar. So later on, as years went on, Egypt was invaded by the Hyksos, which is Arab tribes traveling from Saudi Arabia, and Egypt over many years lost its native origin of sons of Ham, and they became populated by the Arabs, and perhaps some mixture of Arabs with a local population. Hamites created a nation of Egypt, which today speaks Arabic, had took Islam, the religion of Muhammad, and therefore Egyptians, Saudi Arabians, Iraqis, Yemens, Jordanians, Libyans, Syrians, Levant, Syria, and then eventually Turkey took their religion. On the Far East, Islam spread over there. So Islam became religion of many nations, not all of them ethnically the same, genetically the same, but united by the religion, by the Quran. So there's 3 types, so to speak, of the Muslim thing. The most native, so to speak, were Saudi Arabians. Then the next group, you can call them, let's say, Ismailites. And the Ismailites tend to settle over where today's Petra is, today where Jordan is, and the West Bank, so-called West Bank, which was part of the Israel before, when Jews crossed over to this land. Judea and Samaria is called after Judea, but over time, Jordan. Now we're talking about modern times, 150 years ago. We're talking about British mandates, looking Turkish, Ottoman Empire, all that. Then the map started to change and more current events started to modify. As a result of that, today, we cannot say that the same people who were present in these lands 3,500 years ago are the same people today. Of course, there was a lot of mixing of people happens, and today, the Arab world essentially extends from the Arab Peninsula over to Egypt, over to Libya, Morocco, and so forth, to Northern Africa, and the only residual connection to the ancient times where Gaza is, and the populations of Gaza, whole population in Gaza, that is the Philistine that came from Crete, Phoenicians. But over time, it also merged with the incoming Egyptian populations, with perhaps some Jewish populations, and maybe even traveling Saudi Arabian, Yemeni populations. So as a result, today's group is no longer what was many thousand years ago, and it's a present, it became present reality. So having said that, of course, Iran is not Semites, not Hamites. They are from Japhet, the third son of Noah, and they're related to Indians, they're related to Europeans. So they are, and one of the reasons that there is some little conflict between Iran and Arabs is because ethnically they are very different. Religion is the same, but even within the Islam religion, there are Shiites, uh, um, there's the Sunnis, and therefore different religious perspectives cause some friction between them. But all that background just explains to us, so the people in Gaza, today's conflict, are not the same Arabs ethnically as the initial Saudi Arabian allies. Just like the Jews today are not the same Jews that were the Jews thousands and thousands of years ago. I mean, being Jewish, I have to be objective to the fact that if you look at the Jews in Sweden and the Jews in Morocco, they don't look very different. There's a blonde Jews with straight hair, and Yemeni Jews with a curly hair and a pass, and they don't look like brothers and sisters if you look at them. Why? Because over the years, they mixed with the population they live. Norway, Sweden, northern part of Europe, Jews, over Russians, Polish, they merged to some degree with local population. And what's now unite the Jews all over the world, America, Europe, Middle East, Israel, Jews in Saudi Arabia. To this day, there are some Jews in Saudi Arabia, Jews in Iran. What unites them, not necessarily ethnic features, but the background and religion that is common to them all. And they all have genetically a portion of Abrahamic seed, but that seed was added to it over time, the seeds of other nations within which they lived during exile. Same thing comes to Ismailites. Same thing also comes to the Jews who live in Egypt and Libya. The only Jews that really didn't mix, or maybe a little bit, perhaps, maybe in the many, many years, was slave trade and slave coming to Saudi Arabia from Africa. Perhaps some mixing happened there, but overall, the features of Saudi Arabian Arabs, probably the more classical features of how Arab tribes look like, including Jewish ancestors many, many thousands of years ago. But that is not something to be proud to be or not proud to be. That's just a fact. And the point here that today's world is a mixture of all sorts of movement of the nations. And because of that, we have to look forward to the unity, to the harmony, understanding they all come from Adam and Eve, at least from Noah, so to speak. And with that, if you have any comments, please let me know. But the important thing to remember before we look at it, that whether you're religious or not, whether you believe in Torah, Bible, Quran, the unity of these three books gives us a plain directive to how to live our life, to live in peace. And all of us, Jews, Arabs, Europeans, Americans, Middle Easterns, Chinese, if we try to concentrate on commonality between us, it will be a much happier, peaceful, and nice world. To force somebody's religion down the throat to another person, or to force your opinion and being right, being sure and right about yourself, and not give a benefit that another person might have a point, is too presumptuous. And because of that, we need to look in religion the 90% of what can be interpreted as good, and take the portion that seem to be controversial and downplay that effect today, and not to concentrate to find the verse in the Torah that says something that Muslims don't agree, or for the Jews to find the verse in the Quran that they might not agree. Don't look at those things, because in order to understand those differences and subtleties, you need to know a lot more about Quran. You need to study, and you need to know a lot more about Torah, and you need to study it. And once you study it, you find out that we're all brothers and sisters. And with that, shalom, salam, peace. Be well, live in peace. Brothers, unite.